The Ojibwe, the Past and Present of the Anishinaabe, by Alicia Halverson. Celebrating traditions. The sound of a thumping drum fills the air. People of all ages are singing in their native language. A single line of dancers follows in step with the rhythmic heartbeat of the drum. Brightly colored ribbons, beads, and feathers decorate their clothing. After they have gathered in a circle around the drum, a medicine man begins the pipe ceremony. It is a prayer for all of the dancers and for the crowd of visitors. The grand entry of the powwow has begun. Powwows are an important tradition in many American Indian tribes. Ojibwe powwows celebrate life, pride, and the history of a strong group of people. Dancing and singing at powwows carry a deep spiritual meaning for the Ojibwe, who call themselves the Anishinaabe. The powwow ceremony is a time to gather with family and friends to honor, remember, and share Anishinaabe culture. Early life. Most Ojibwe lived in the northern Great Lakes region. Their ancestors had lived far to the east. About 1,000 years ago, they started a slow migration to the Great Lakes. The Ojibwe mainly lived in would become the states of Michigan, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin, and the future Canadian provinces of Ontario and Manitoba. The Ojibwe were hunter and gatherers and harvested wild rice. They made sugar from the sap of maple trees. Fishing was also a primary source of food. Ojibwe used birch bark for many things, such as food containers, canoes, and to cover their wigwams. Each season, Ojibwe set up homes close to the available food sources. The Ojibwe separated into small bands throughout the seasons so they would not compete for food. When a band moved, their birch bark wigwam coverings were rolled up and taken with them. Typically, Ojibwe would return to the same places each year. Ojibwe often rebuilt their homes on the old frameworks left behind the previous year. Follow the seasons. In the early months of spring, the Ojibwe built their homes near maple trees. They would build the wigwams with hardwood frames and cover them with fresh birch bark and reeds. The Ojibwe tapped maple trees for the sugary sap. Then they boiled the sap into sugar and syrup, which they used to flavor their food. Toward the end of spring, the Ojibwe moved their camp closer to a nearby lake or stream. Men fished the waters in birch bark canoes and used handmade spears or nets. In the summer months, men also hunted game, such as birds, deer, and moose. Women and girls gathered berries and plants used for medicine. Together, families planted crops such as beans, squash, and corn. The Ojibwe often stored some of their food, including dried meat and fish, in containers underground to use during the upcoming cold weather. In the fall, the Ojibwe moved near marshes to gather wild rice, known as manumin. They tapped the rice off the stalks into their canoes using long sticks called knockers. Once the rice was harvested, it was dried, roasted, and stored. When the bitter winter arrived, the Ojibwe were prepared by covering their wigwams with thick furs and animal skins. Campfires burned inside wigwams to help shut out the cold. Men hunted and trapped deer, bear, moose, beaver, and rabbits. Men also fished during the winter through holes cut into ice-covered lakes. The Ojibwe ate the food they stored throughout the season. Wigwam dwellings. Ojibwe wigwams were domed or conical dwellings. They varied in size depending on the number of occupants. Poles formed a circular framework. The frame was enclosed with mats made of bark or reeds. A blanket or hide covered the wigwam's entrance. Depending on its size, a wigwam could house one or more families. In larger wigwams, more than one campfire could burn at a time. An opening in the roof of the wigwam allowed smoke to get outside. Families slept on mattresses filled with soft material such as duck feathers, cattail fuzz, rabbit fur, or balsam branches. Soft blankets were made from bear, rabbit, or deer hide. Each morning, the bedding would be rolled up and placed along the edges of the wigwam for seating. Ojibwe families. Children, parents, and sometimes grandparents all shared a wigwam. Several families within the same band often joined each other to make sugar and syrup and to harvest wild rice. During summer months, it was common for 300 to 400 Ojibwe to gather together to trade and celebrate. Couples would marry during the gatherings. Ojibwe women were the cooks. They stored items in containers they made out of bark. They sewed bedding and moccasins out of fur and animal skins. Manumin. According to an old Ojibwe oral tradition, the Ojibwe were told to find the place where the food grows on the water. They moved from the east to the shores of the Great Lakes. Manumin, or wild rice, grew in abundance there. The Ojibwe view wild rice as a gift from the Creator, and it quickly became fundamental to their diet. Manumin is also culturally important and is still used in many ceremonies and feasts today. Traditionally, women and girls wore dresses made out of animal hide. During winter, women and girls added leggings and fur coats for warmth. They decorated their clothing with beads and dyed porcupine quills in beautiful patterns. The skills were often passed down and taught to younger girls. Men wore breechcloths, which are short deerskin clothes worn around the middle of their bodies. In cold weather, they added leather leggings, warm shirts, and fur capes or robes. Men typically made bows, arrows, and spears. They made the tools out of animal bones, wood, and stones. Men built canoes out of birch bark. They used the canoes for fishing and wild rice gathering. When boys learned these skills, they felt proud because it meant they were becoming men. The Ojibwe enjoyed telling stories to each other. Elders and grandparents believed that stories taught children Ojibwe beliefs and values. Young Ojibwe tribe members were taught that honesty, sharing, and treating all living things with respect were important. Loss and change. Life dramatically changed for the Ojibwe in the 1600s when French explorers and fur traders reached Ojibwe territory. The French people wanted beaver and other animal furs in exchange for cloth, cookware, metal tools, knives, and guns. The relationship between the French and the Ojibwe was usually respectful. Natives were hunting and trapping so many animals, however, that some became scarce. Other Ojibwe resources also started to diminish. Neighboring tribes, the Iroquois and the Dakota, fought the Ojibwe for hunting land. Many Ojibwe died during the battles. European explorers and Christian missionaries also brought dreadful diseases with them, such as smallpox, which killed many Ojibwe people. In the mid-1700s, England and France battled for control of North American land and trade in the French and Indian War. The Ojibwe sided with France, while the Iroquois were allies of England. A large number of Ojibwe's lives were lost, and eventually England won the war. England then controlled more Ojibwe territory and the fur trade. During the Revolutionary War, the Ojibwe were on the losing side again. American colonists were fighting England for their independence. The Americans won, and many Ojibwe died in the struggle from diseases. Earlier treaties were ignored, and settlers continued to push westward into Indian country. Starting in the 1820s, the U.S. government signed several treaties with the Ojibwe people and other native tribes. Treaty councils took place in Prairie du Chien and Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Ojibwe leaders such as Hole in the Day helped negotiate the treaties. The Ojibwe thought if they gave up something, they would get something in return. By the 1850s, treaties forced Ojibwe onto reservations, mainly in Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. The government promised shipments of food and supplies, but the shipments were often late or the food was rotten. In the treaties, the tribes had reserved the right to hunt and fish on the land they gave up. But with limited resources, the Ojibwe had no choice but to learn to farm the land or they would face starvation. The Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs worked to assimilate the Ojibwe and make them more like European Americans. In the 1880s, children were forced to leave their families and attend schools far away. They were forbidden to speak the Ojibwe language. In some cases, children were also given new names. Some Ojibwe were arrested for fishing and hunting in the traditional ways off of the reservations. They were arrested even though their rights had been guaranteed in the treaties. Many missionaries and government officials did not respect Native American customs. Ojibwe life today. The Anishinaabe people make up the third largest tribe in North America. Today, there are about 170,000 Ojibwe in the United States. and 60,000 in Canada. Most of the Ojibwe consider themselves woodland people. About half of the Ojibwe people live away from the reservations, often in cities. So you can see these brown spots here are the different reservations that are earmarked for them. Nation and clan. There are 7 Ojibwe clans. Children belong to their father's clan. The original clans have animal names: crane, loon, fish, bear, deer, marten, and bird. The larger clans are divided into 150 bands in the United States and Canada. Each Ojibwe band has its own government, laws, and services for its members. The leader of the band, the chief, is called a gima'a. In the past, chiefs were only male, usually a past chief's son or relative. Today, Ojibwe chiefs can be men or women. Tribal governments work hard to help their people. Money generated from casinos on reservation land, for example, benefits each tribe member. The tribal government also uses the revenue to help build schools, clinics, and businesses. The Ojibwe people have adapted to changes from their past, but they deeply cherish their traditions. They are proud that the Ojibwe language is now taught in schools on and off the reservations. When it is time to gather wild rice or tap maple trees for syrup, Ojibwe living in the cities often return home to the reservations. They enjoy continuing these practices with family and friends. Ojibwe people also gather at many powwows. People of all ages sing and dance along to the drumming, celebrating the Anishinaabe culture. Connecting to the past. Sharing their traditions with the younger generations is important to the Anishinaabe. In Ojibwe culture, elders are important sources of learning. They know treasured information about their ancestors, such as stories, crafts, and ceremonies. Elders help pass down this knowledge to young people to help preserve the culture. Many Ojibwe children attend school on a reservation. The reservation schools are respectful of Ojibwe culture and teach students language and history. Children not living on reservations attend public or private schools. Some Ojibwe bands have educational programs to help their members succeed by providing scholarships, extracurricular activities, and library services. Some students stay home to attend college on the reservation. Others leave reservations to go to college. Some universities offer classes in Ojibwe language and culture. Today's Ojibwe people work on and off the reservations. They seek jobs in a variety of fields, including manufacturing, construction, entertainment, medicine, and law enforcement. Ojibwe reservations today have many businesses that provide jobs for their tribal members. They include bait shops, campgrounds, gas stations, hotels, and restaurants. On reservations, Ojibwe people also support themselves through farming, fishing, forestry, and wild rice gathering. Some reservations rely on tourism and selling goods online, such as wild rice and soup. Religion. The Ojibwe have long believed that dreams and visions are connections to the spirit world. Children were taught to remember their dreams and to interpret them as messages from the Great Spirit, Gichi Manitou. Sometimes the Ojibwe people also made webbed dream catchers. They hung them to prevent bad dreams from reaching people. The Ojibwe people were one of the few tribes to write down their religious beliefs. They drew pictographs on birch bark used as paper. Healers who had special familiarity with sacred plants in Gichi Manitou kept the birch bark scrolls safe. They respected male and female healers, were part of the Midewiwin, the Grand Medicine Society. Sports. Ojibwe children play a wide variety of sports and games for fun and to remember their past. Lacrosse was and still is one of the most popular Ojibwe games. Traditionally, lacrosse was a rough game and villages played other villages. Lacrosse was played with 2 poles. A player could not touch the ball with anything except the netted basket at the end of one of the poles. They could, however, use the pole to hit or trip another player. Players dove after the ball to try to lob it into the goal. Lacrosse has changed through the years, but the game remains an Ojibwe favorite. What the Ojibwe ate changed with the seasons as bands relocated to be near resources such as wild rice and maple sugar. Maple sugar was used as a seasoning on many types of food. Sugar also played an important role in ceremonies and feasts. Today, Ojibwe continue to hunt and fish. They still use canoes to gather wild rice. Families plant squash, corn, and potatoes in gardens. Although fruit is not as plentiful as it once was, Ojibwe people still collect wild fruits and berries. So I'm going to just go through this really quick. These are some of their formal regalia they wear at their special occasions. And a lot of their crafts are beadwork and embroidery. And medicine, they believed in physical and mental healing with natural healing stuff.